Welcome to another version of Music with Friends, socially distanced for the most part, but we are always happy to have an excuse to get together to play music, and we're happy for any audience we have. We love the ones in person, and we also love the ones who are watching us remotely, so thank you for coming. The first piece written by DeBlasio, an American composer who unfortunately had his life cut short by AIDS. And the piece was written for the observance of Advent at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. An unusual combination, guitar and organ. I think that's probably the only piece written for both people, both performers. So it's kind of a fun way to get together with musicians that you don't usually play with. DeBlasio, mostly known for song cycles, but this is a very special piece for us. The second piece, Greensleeves, is very familiar to all of you. Ralph Vaughan spent a lot of his time going around into the countryside with folk tunes, English folk tunes. This is probably the most well-known of them, so this is a bit of a look toward Christmas here. And the last piece, La Catedral, was written by a Paraguayan virtuoso guitarist. This is probably his best-known piece, and a real workout for Ben. trouble with microphones. Anyway, I'm really pleased to introduce Father Jim Adams. He was gracious enough to agree to do a meditation today. And it's the ask a busy person, you'll get an answer. So, yeah, I guess answer. Well, thank you, Father Jim.
Thank you, Molly, for inviting me to be here today, and thank you to Chaplain Nita for welcoming me to St. John's Chapel. Molly asked if I might reflect a bit on Advent. When I think of Advent, I think of beginning. Advent is the beginning of the church year, and it's the way that Christians begin to tell the story of Jesus Christ and the great mystery that we call incarnation, that God entered this world as a baby in Bethlehem and fully human lived and died among us as one of us in order to reconcile human beings to human beings and human beings to God. And the story begins with Mary. There's an old saying, for God to operate in this world, God needs human beings to cooperate with him. And it was Mary that was needed to give her consent for the story of Jesus Christ. Mary's willingness, her yes. And the story of her yes is known as the Annunciation. When the angel Gabriel announced to Mary that God had chosen her. About 10 years ago, I was introduced to a poem by Denise Levertov called Annunciation, and I turned to it every Advent since. Denise Levertov was born to Jewish parents in Russia. Her parents converted to the Christian faith and emigrated to England, and her father became an Anglican priest. Denise was a young child during these years, and she never went to school or had any formal education. Yet, as a child, day and night, her parents read to her classic works of literature, history, and poetry, in Hebrew and in English. At age 5, she decided she wanted to become a poet. At age 12, she sent a poem to the renowned English poet T.S. Eliot, who was so struck by her poem that he wrote back to her a 2-page typed single-spaced letter, commenting on her poem and encouraging her. She served as a nurse in World War II, and shortly after the war, moved to this country where she spent the rest of her life. Her poem, Annunciation, for me captures the greatness of Mary. It says, she says that in Mary was fused intelligence and compassion, and she is called in the poem the bravest of all people. The poem says we all have annunciations in our life. Times when we have opportunities, possibilities, when the road before us becomes narrow, and we must choose to take it or stay on the safe, wide road. The time when light and storm merge, and do we say yes? And the poem says that many of us, most often, when we have our annunciations, out of fear, do not say yes. We take the comfortable, the safe way, and the roads, the opportunities disappear. When I read this poem every year, it makes me shudder a bit to think about the times in my life that I didn't take the roads out of fear. And it makes me pray for just a bit of Mary's courage. I think of some of the great classic portraits of this event of the Annunciation and how the artists seem to capture both the fearfulness of this event, of the angel saying to Mary, God has chosen you. The fearfulness of the event, and yet Mary's consent at once. And so you might remember portraits where Mary is stepping back in fear, yet leaning forward with consent. When I think of Mary, I've often wondered, is there been any person in human history who has been more influential? Anyone who, not just in her own day or her own era, has influenced others, but in every day since? Is there anyone who has been more admired, more loved, whose influence has brought more peace, more inspiration? So I'll read this poem by Denise Levertov, Annunciation, and hope that it might bless you as it has me. We know the scene. The room, variously furnished, almost always a lectern, a book, always the tall lily. Arrived on solemn grandeur of great wings, the angelic ambassador, standing or hovering, whom she acknowledges, a guest. But we are told of meek obedience. No one mentions courage. The engendering spirit did not enter without consent. God waited. She was free to accept or to refuse. Choice, integral to humanness. Aren't there annunciations of one sort or another in most lives? Some unwillingly undertake great destinies, enact them in sullen pride, uncomprehending. More often, those moments when roads of light and storm open from darkness in a man or woman are turned away from in dread, in a wave of weakness and despair, and with relief. Ordinary lives continue. God does not smite them, but the gates close, the pathway vanishes. She had been a child who played, ate, slept like any other child, but unlike others, wept only for pity, laughed in joy, not triumph. Compassion and intelligence fused in her, indivisible, called to a destiny more momentous than any in all of time. She did not quail, only asked a simple, "How can this be?" And gravely, courteously, took to heart the angel's reply, perceiving instantly the astounding ministry she was offered, to bear in her womb infinite weight and lightness, to carry in hidden finite inwardness 9 months of eternity, to contain in slender vase of being the sum of power, in narrow flesh the sum of light, then bring to birth, push out into air a man-child, needing, like any other, milk and love, but who was God.